In 1994, a woman walked into a department store, sprayed a single drop of Polo Green or Mitsuko on her wrist, and stopped a room cold. Not because of the bottle, not because of the name on the label, because of what was inside that bottle, ingredients that are now banned. Ingredients that scientists spent decades telling us were dangerous. Here's what nobody in the fragrance industry wants you to say out loud. The perfumes that made people fall in love, lose sleep, and chase ghosts across decades were built on materials regulators have since wiped from existence. And now, some of those same scientists are quietly admitting something that will make every perfume lover feel both vindicated and heartbroken at the same time. This is the story of 15 banned and restricted perfume ingredients from the 90s that changed how humans smelled, and why no amount of money can buy you that exact experience ever again. Number 7 on this list is why your favorite perfume suddenly smelled wrong one day, even though you bought the exact same bottle. And number 3 will explain why certain vintage bottles now sell for more than a car payment. Before we start, if you've ever opened an old bottle and felt something you couldn't name, subscribe, because everything you're about to hear will give that feeling a name. Number 15, non-FCF bergamot oil. Let's start with something that sounds innocent, because it is almost. Natural bergamot oil, the soul of Earl Grey tea, the citrus sparkle sitting at the top of half the classic colognes of the 80s and 90s. Here's what they took from us. Traditional bergamot oil contained something called bergaptan, a naturally occurring compound that when it hits sunlight on your skin can cause phototoxic reactions. Burning, darkening, real irritation. Regulators looked at that and said, strip it out. So they created FCF bergamot, bergaptan-free, safer, approved, legal, and technically it's still bergamot. But perfumers who trained on the original material will tell you quietly, over a glass of something expensive, that something bright and alive walked out the door with that compound. The original smelled like the actual fruit, green and sharp and radiant. The modern version smells like bergamot concept. Correct but flat. Safe but smaller. Your grandmother's bottle of Chanel No. 5 from 1991 opened differently than the one you would buy today. That's partly why. Number 14. Safrole-based materials. Now we go deeper. Safrole. Derived from sassafras root, used for decades to bring a spicy sweet warmth to fragrances, something between cloves and root beer, and something ancient you can't quite name. Regulators flagged it, not just for skin safety, but because safrole is a precursor to certain controlled substances, MDMA synthesis specifically. So the DEA got involved. And safrole-based materials largely vanished from mainstream perfume formulas. Here's the grief in that. The fragrances built around safrole had a complexity that's genuinely difficult to recreate. Depth, a sense of something underneath. Oriental perfumes from the early 1990s that smelled like walking into a spice market at midnight. That quality had safrole in the architecture. Perfumers today still search for substitutes. They have not found one that does exactly what safrole did. Something, it turns out, cannot be engineered. They can only be lost. Number 13. High-dose eugenol. Eugenol is the molecule that makes cloves smell like cloves, warm, almost medicinal, deeply spiced. In small doses, it is still used today. But in the 90s, perfumers could build around it. They used it in concentrations that would stop a regulatory committee cold right now. The restriction came because eugenol is a known sensitizer. Use too much, wear it enough times, and some people develop contact allergies. So the EU capped it. hard. The vintage Oriental fragrances that wore like a second skin, heavy and complex and slightly scandalous, were built at eugenol concentrations you simply cannot use anymore. It was a structural element. Remove it or reduce it significantly, and the architecture changes. It is like removing a load-bearing wall. The room still stands, but it leans. Number 12. Tree moss extract. Here's one most people have never heard of, and that's exactly the problem. Tree moss, less famous than its cousin oak moss, but doing just as much work in the background of countless masculine fragrances from the 80s and 90s. Fougère, woody scents, those crisp barbershop and forest colognes that made men smell like they'd done something productive outdoors. Tree moss was in the foundation. Restrictions came from the same concern that hit oak moss, allergenic compounds. So tree moss went the way of oak moss, restricted, reformulated around, and eventually absent. And here's the thing about an ingredient that works in the base of a fragrance. You never smell it directly. You smell what it does to everything above it. Tree moss made the green notes greener. It made the wood notes warmer. It made the whole composition settle in a way modern substitutes have never quite replicated. When tree moss disappeared, a generation of masculine fragrances quietly lost their gravity. Number 11. Musk ambrette. Musk ambrette was warmth. A natural, slightly nutty, slightly floral warmth that sat close to skin and made a fragrance feel intimate. It was a nitro musk, a class of synthetic musks invented in the late 1800s that perfumers relied on for much of the 20th century. The safety concerns that ended musk ambrette's run were serious. Neurological concerns emerged in some studies, and the industry pulled back. It largely disappeared. But the effect it created did not have a clean replacement. Musk ambrette diffused beautifully. It had what perfumers call radiance. It projected without being loud. It made fragrances feel inhabited, human, alive. Today's musks often feel cleaner, airier. That sounds positive, until you realize that what they replaced had a warmth. Modern formulas have been chasing ever since, and still have not quite caught. Number 10. Musk xylene. Third pattern break. The industry wants you to blame price. Stop here, because this is where the conversation gets uncomfortable. If you have been a fragrance lover for more than 10 years, you have had this experience. You pick up a bottle of your favorite, same name, same designer, same font on the box, and something is wrong. Not dramatically wrong, just less. Flatter, gone faster, different on your skin. And everyone, reviewers, forums, comment sections, says the same thing. Brands are cutting costs. They are using cheaper ingredients. It is all about profit now. And sometimes that is true. Let us be honest. But here is what almost nobody says, because it is less satisfying as a villain story. A massive portion of those reformulations happened not because brands were being cheap, but because the regulatory bodies, IFRA and EU, restricted or outright banned the ingredients that made those fragrances work. Musk xylene is the clearest example. One of the most important synthetic musks of the late 20th century, present in countless designer fragrances. It gave compositions a rich, smooth, skin-melting dry down that could last 12 hours and still smell beautiful in the final stretch. Environmental concerns, safety data, restrictions, and phase-outs. When musk xylene went, the dry downs changed. That lingering, smoky skin final hour of wearing a great perfume, fragrance lovers know exactly what this feels like. That became harder to achieve. Brands did not advertise the change. They could not explain it without explaining why. So the fragrance just quietly became less than it was. Your nose was not wrong. Your memory was not wrong. You were smelling an absence. Number 9. Natural musk deer extract. This one carries grief of a different kind. For centuries, natural musk from the musk deer was one of perfumery's most precious materials. It didn't just smell extraordinary on its own. It amplified everything around it. It made florals more radiant, made woods more sensuous, and acted as a fixative that could make a fragrance last on skin and fabric for days. Wildlife protection laws ended its commercial use. The musk deer population had been devastated by poaching. The ban was the right call. Ethically, no fragrance is worth a species. But the perfumers who trained on natural musk describe it with the kind of reverence you hear from sommeliers talking about legendary vintages. They say modern musks, ambroxan, ISO E Super, and the whole library of replacements are impressive, skillfully made, and sometimes beautiful. They are not the same thing. Natural musk had an animalic quality that connected to something biological in people who smelled it, a depth that felt like memory. Experts who have worked with it say there is nothing in the modern palette that does exactly what it did, and there never will be. Number 8. Natural civet. The conversation about civet is always complicated, and it should be. Civet, the secretion of the civet cat, used in tiny amounts in perfumery for centuries, was controversial long before regulators touched it. Ethical concerns about the animals drove the industry towards synthetic civets decades before any formal ban. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Fragrances that used natural civet, in expert hands, in microscopic amounts, smelled alive in a way that genuinely unnerved people. Not dirty, not unpleasant, alive. It added something almost biological, a skin quality that made a fragrance feel like it was emanating from a person rather than sitting on top of them. Collectors who've smelled vintage bottles with natural civet describe the experience as unsettling in the best possible way, like the fragrance had a pulse. Synthetic civet does an admirable job. It handles the technical requirements. But the perfumers who knew the original will tell you, something that had a pulse became a very good photograph of something that had a pulse. Number 7. Natural ambergris. If any ingredient on this list deserves the word mythical, it's ambergris, a substance produced in the digestive tract of sperm whales, found washed up on beaches, aged by the ocean for years. Worth more per gram than gold at its finest. Used in perfumery as both a fixative and a modifier, it did not just make fragrances last. It smoothed them, rounded their edges, and created a seamless quality that made compositions feel like a single sustained note rather than separate ingredients. Legal complications, sourcing challenges, and the sheer impossibility of supply made natural ambergris effectively vanish from mainstream perfumery. The modern replacement, ambroxan, is genuinely excellent. You smell it everywhere now. That clean, woody, skin-forward quality in contemporary fragrances. That's ambroxan. But perfumers who've worked with natural ambergris describe it as something categorically different, softer, warmer, more complex. Ambroxan creates a structure. Natural ambergris created a feeling. Number 6. Lyral. In 2019, the European Union banned Lyral entirely from cosmetics. If you don't know the name, you know the smell. Lyral was in everything. It was a synthetic floral ingredient that provided a soft, creamy, slightly transparent flower note, present in countless designer fragrances of the 90s and the 2000s. If you ever smelled a shampoo or fabric softener from that era, and thought, "That's beautiful. What is that?" It was often Lyral doing the work. The ban came because Lyral is one of the most common causes of fragrance allergy. Real data, real reactions in real people. The safety case was legitimate, but Lyral was also, in skilled hands, genuinely irreplaceable in certain contexts. The soft floral texture it created, something between a greenhouse and clean skin, had no single substitute. Perfumers had to redesign compositions from scratch when Lyral went away. There are fragrances you loved in the late 90s that no longer exist in the bottle with the same name. Lyral was part of why they smelled that way. It left, quietly, in 2019. Many people still haven't noticed. But before I keep going, I need to tell you something that completely changed the way I shop for fragrance. Because most women aren't overspending on perfume because they have bad taste. They are overspending because nobody tells them what actually happened to the fragrances they love. The reformulations, the restricted ingredients, the bottles that look identical but smell like a shadow of what they used to be. That first spray at the department store counter? It's designed to hook you emotionally before the thin dry down, the missing base notes, or the 2-hour longevity ever reveals itself. And once you start noticing it, you cannot unsee it. Over the last few years, I've been digging through fragrance forums, reformulation reports, batch comparisons, vintage bottle reviews, perfumer interviews, IFRA restriction lists, and hundreds of real collector experiences trying to answer one question. Which fragrances still smell the way they're supposed to? And how do you know before you spend the money? The vintage bottles actually worth hunting for. The modern releases that get genuinely close to the originals. The designer fragrances that quietly got weaker while keeping the same price. The hidden gems built around ingredients that haven't been touched yet. The exact reformulation red flags that tell you a bottle has already been hollowed out. And the smartest ways to smell what you're actually buying before you commit. I put all of it into a practical guide called the Fragrance Collector's Cheat Code, so you can shop with your nose instead of the marketing. You can access it through the link in the description, or by scanning the QR code in the top right corner. But stay here, because what's coming next is where this list gets genuinely uncomfortable. Number 5. Musk Xylene's cousin, nitro musks as a class. Step back from individual ingredients for a moment and look at the whole category. Nitro musks were the backbone of synthetic perfumery for the better part of the 20th century. Musk xylene, musk ambrette, musk tibertine, musk moskin. One by one, safety and environmental data stripped them from the palette. What replaced them were polycyclic musks and macrocyclic musks, cleaner, safer, better understood. And some of them are beautiful. Galaxolide, habanolide. Modern perfumery uses them skillfully. But nitro musks had a quality perfumers describe as smooth. Not just musk smooth, but compositionally smoothing. They blended materials together in a way that made a fragrance feel unified rather than assembled. Their absence created a technical challenge that the industry has spent 30 years solving and still debates. Number 4. Oak Moss Absolute, 4th Pattern Break. What vintage actually means. Let's talk about what a vintage bottle actually contains. Oak moss. The ingredient that makes this conversation real for most fragrance collectors. The foundation of the entire Chypre family, Mitsuko, Miss Dior, Aromatics Elixir, Polo Green in its original form. A dark, earthy, almost mushroom-damp material harvested from oak trees. It smelled like wet forest floor and complexity and something close to immortality. IFRA restrictions have been tightening around oak moss for years because of its allergenic compounds atronol and chloroatronol. The threshold for allowed concentrations has become so low that building a true chypre in the classic sense is essentially impossible within current regulations. The reformulations that followed weren't subtle. Fragrance lovers who owned bottles of Mitsuko from the 1980s or original Polo Green, and then smelled the modern version, describe an experience like calling a phone number from your childhood and hearing a stranger answer. Same name, same bottle shape, same memory attached. Different perfume. Vintage bottles with oak moss at original concentration now trade at prices that would genuinely shock people outside the collector world. Not because they're antiques, because they contain materials you cannot legally put in a new fragrance at those levels. They're not just old, they're impossible. That's what vintage means now. A bottle that contains a version of the world that no longer exists. Number 3, the combination effect. Here's what scientists are now beginning to say, carefully in papers that don't make headlines, and it's the most important thing on this list. Many of the ingredients that were restricted weren't dangerous in the way we understood danger. They were problematic alone, in high concentrations, in certain populations. But in the context of a complete fragrance composition used by skilled perfumers in calibrated amounts, the interaction between these materials created something the science hadn't fully accounted for. The combination effect. The way oak moss and civet and natural ambergris and musk xylene worked together, each amplifying the others, each covering the other's rough edges, produced compositions whose sum was genuinely greater than their parts. When regulators restricted these ingredients one by one, the response was to substitute each one individually. But they didn't create the same whole, because the whole was never the sum of its parts. It was the relationship between them. And you cannot regulate a relationship back into existence. Some perfumers have been saying this for years. Some scientists are finally listening. Number 2, natural ambergris and the longevity question. Here's something that should infuriate you if you've ever bought a modern fragrance and watched it disappear in 2 hours. One of the primary functions of natural ambergris, and of several other now restricted fixatives, was longevity. These materials didn't just add to the smell, they fixed other materials to skin. They slowed the evaporation of volatile molecules. They were, in chemical terms, retarders, and the artistic effect of that chemistry was a fragrance that evolved on your skin across hours rather than simply fading. Modern fragrances, built without these fixatives at their original potency, often don't have the same tenacity. The industry's response has been to increase the concentration of other materials, such as more fragrance oil and stronger synthetic molecules like ambroxan. That creates projection, but not the same character over time. The sillage of a great 90s fragrance in the 8th hour was often one of its best moments. When the base revealed itself slowly, drying down to something intimate, warm, and completely personal to your skin chemistry. That experience is increasingly rare. Part of the reason is sitting in those restricted ingredient lists. Number 1. The secret collectors won't tell you. Every serious fragrance collector knows this. Most won't say it publicly because it sounds like an accusation. The perfumes that defined the 80s and the 90s, the ones people describe with actual emotion, the ones that bring back a whole life with one spray, the ones that someone named in a comment and you felt it in your chest, were not legendary because of marketing. They were not legendary because people were less sophisticated. They were not legendary because nostalgia distorts everything. They were legendary because they contained materials that no living perfumer can legally use at those concentrations. The artists who made them had a palette we do not have anymore. Oak moss, natural civet, natural ambergris, musk ambrette, musk xylene, Lyral, safrole, in combinations and concentrations that have since been banned, restricted, or priced into impossibility. Scientists are now doing something genuinely remarkable. They are going back and studying these formulas, these specific ingredient relationships, and acknowledging, with the careful language of peer review, that certain qualities these materials created were not incidental. They were functional. They were doing things to human olfaction that we still do not fully understand. The regulations were not all wrong. Some of these restrictions prevented real harm. Some people had real allergic reactions. Wildlife was genuinely protected. These were not pointless rules made by people who hated beauty. But something was also genuinely lost. And the fragrance industry's polite silence on this, the quiet reformulations, the identical packaging, the pretense that what is inside the bottle is essentially the same, that part is worth naming. Your nose remembered correctly. The thing you are chasing in a vintage bottle is not nostalgia. It is a chemistry that no longer exists.